Chances are you probably hate your boss. I mean, it's only normal. Now imagine your job involves beating another person senseless for cash, you're woefully underpaid, and your boss is Dana White. Sounds tough, right? But for hundreds and hundreds of fighters, this is the reality they face just to make a decent living. This is a list of fighters who were kicked out of the UFC by their boss for various different reasons. In 2008, the UFC decided it best to sign Palhares. Back then, he held a 7-2 record as a pro and was widely acclaimed for being a submission god. But Palhares at the time liked to hold on to submissions for just a little bit longer than he should have. This was ultimately his fatal flaw, as whenever he took on Mike Pierce in 2013, he was fired afterwards by Dana White because he held onto a leg lock for too long. Just in case you didn't know, the leg lock is one of the most excruciatingly painful submissions in MMA. A few seconds difference can literally destroy someone's career if it's held onto for too long. Rousimar in the previous year failed the drugs test for having elevated levels of testosterone. This, alongside his reluctance to let go of submissions, meant that Dana White had just the last straw with him. Since being booted out, he's fought in a multitude of promotions, such as the World Series of Fighting, KSW, and many others with middling success. There was a time when Miguel Torres was considered the best 135-pounder on earth. In mid-2009, he was 37-1 in his pro career and held the WEC belt. At the time, the UFC didn't have a bantamweight division, so the WEC was considered the pinnacle for smaller weight divisions. That same year, Torres would go on to get KO'd in dramatic fashion by Brian Bowles in the first round. Torres would then get choked out by Joseph Benavidez, but would bounce back by choking out Charlie Valencia in 2010. Afterwards, the WEC was acquired by the UFC. Torres went 2-1 in the promotion before being fired in 2011 over an inappropriate tweet. What makes this an odd entry is that many other fighters have said and done worse things but faced zero repercussions for their actions. John Lineker is one of the most violent fighters to ever grace the confines of the octagon. When locked in the cage, he's just a mini Justin Gaethje, throwing fireworks at every opportunity. However, in 2019, Dana and the company decided that despite him being 12-4 in the UFC and possessing a litany of impressive finishes and performances, that it was best to cut Lineker from the roster. This happened soon after Lineker withdrew from a bout with Rob Font due to a cut sustained from weight cutting. In the past 2 years, Lineker has withdrawn from 3 bouts due to injury and holds a UFC record for missing weight the most amount of times at 5. So it's no surprise then that the UFC and Dana didn't get on well with Lineker. What makes this such an important entry is because it shows that regardless of how entertaining and skilled you are, you're just a few missteps away from being cut by the company. Soon after being fired, One Championship scooped up the free agent and he's yet to debut. There was a time when English wrestler Paul Daley was surging up the UFC welterweight rankings, but his rise in the UFC all came to a staggering halt in 2010 when the train was completely derailed as Daley was fired by Dana White for landing a cheap shot after the bell.
He's done. I don't give a shit if he's the best 170-pounder in the world. He'll never come back here again.
We're talking Paul Daley.
Yeah.
You're cutting him from the UFC.
Yeah. He'll never come back.
Afterwards, Paul would go on to fight in a multitude of other promotions with decent success, and his decent record in both MMA and kickboxing means that he's arguably one of the best fighters ever from England. It's a shame we never got to see Paul perform at his full potential against the top tier elite that's in the UFC. There was a time when the West Lynn gangster and greatest to ever grace planet Earth was on tremendous terms with Dana. Chael was a media talent, a fun fighter who knew how to draw a big audience, and many even believed that one day he would go on to replace Dana White as leader of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Sadly, things went completely out the window when, plot twist, he was fired by Dana White in 2014 due to a failed drugs test. Before failing and being chucked out, Chael was booked to fight Wanderlei Silva, who we will get to just a little bit later. They even had an entire season of the Ultimate Fighter Brazilian edition to promote the fight. In the lead up to the fight, Chael tested positive for just about everything and as a result was kicked out. Chael retired for 2 years and served out his suspension, and then returned to MMA action in 2016, signing with Bellator, and fought against the stars of yesteryear before retiring this year in 2019. He went 2-3 in Bellator, being finished by legends like Tito Ortiz, Lyoto Machida and Fedor Emelianenko. Next up on this irreverent list, we come to the aptly mentioned Wanderlei, one of the scariest, terrifying and fearsome fighters perhaps ever. Wanderlei gained mainstream fame whilst scrapping it out in Pride. He was a staple of the promotion because of his kill or be killed smashing style of fighting and his intense walkouts paired with his axe murderer persona. After Pride was shut down, Wanderlei moved to the UFC, where he had a pretty bad run of performances, losing almost every important fight he had. He was never really able to recapture the incredible momentum he once had in Japan. But fast forward to 2014 and he was booked to battle the bad boy Chael Sonnen. As a result of Chael's comments on Brazil and its inhabitants, anticipation for the clash was at an all-time high point. That was until the entire train derailed when Wanderlei was fired by the UFC. Basically, the story goes that whilst filming The Ultimate Fighter, Wanderlei was supposed to be tested by a tester in Brazil. When he went into the bathroom to pee, he climbed out the window and ran away from the tester. He claims he did this because the tester hadn't the proper uniform on, and he didn't think he was a legitimate tester. But this claim is highly disputed. The UFC kept him on contract for a little bit, but soon he claimed that the UFC were fixing fights and claimed to have actual evidence. That's
fucking illegal.
Soon Silva was cut by the company for his false allegations and offered an apology, stating that he just made the whole thing up.